Hi, in this video I want to talk to you about the perfect PBN hosting. And the idea here is that we want to leave as little of a footprint as possible. And that's why we have different tactics of doing things. So these are just the main ones, which I chose to show you because they're the more simpler ones and the more common ones. And let's start with the first one. So if we want to have our entire network of PBN sites in the same hosting company, each PBN website can only link to one money site. And if you do this, your money sites can all be on the same host. The second one is if you want to use different hosting companies for different PBN sites, then you can link to several money sites, not just one. And both of these methods work. You can use either one of them, but I'm going to explain to you why it's done the way it is. The first method, you can have all your PBN sites and all your money sites on the same hosting, which can be extremely cost efficient. However, you can only link out from a PBN site to one money site. So each site on your PBN, each PBN site, links to one money site. If we have everything connected, from the moment a site is penalized, everything is going to be penalized, both your PBN network and all your money sites. So you don't want to be this guy. You do not want to interlink everything. So if you're going with this strategy, if you're hosting all your PBNs on the same hosting and all your money sites on another hosting, which is the same, so it's not the same as the PBN. So the PBN hosting is for example from Bluehost, and the money sites hosting is for example from Namecheap. But if you go this route, you do not want to interlink them all. You want to do it like this. And remember, different hosts have different IP addresses. And I'll be talking later on a little bit more about IP addresses. But now what you need to understand is that we may have our entire PBN on the same host, so sharing the same IP, but each site in our PBN has to point to different money sites. In this example, all these sites in our PBN are on the same host, which means they share the same IP. But again, they all point to different money sites. So if Google looks at money site A, the only site that it sees it's linking out to it is PBN site A. So if Google decides in fact to get you penalized, it will just penalize money site A and PBN site A, and all the other sites are safe. And that's the main reason why you do not want to interlink everything like this guy right here. Now there's other ways, this way right here. This way you can link from one site in the PBN to several sites and not just one like in the previous method. For this to be possible, you have to have different PBN sites on different hostings. And then there's other ways, of course. For example, you can have all your PBNs on the same hosting, and then you have money sites, each money site on different hostings. For example, we have one money site on Namecheap, another one on GoDaddy, another one on Bluehost, etc., etc., etc. So the importance of IP diversification is something that you need to understand. Basically, IP addresses are publicly available not only to Google, but also to people like us, like me and you. And Google actively monitors websites hosted on the same IP and their connection pattern. So if you host your websites on the same IP, sooner or later, Google will detect that pattern and will penalize your PBN and all the money sites that it links out to. And I want to ask you something. So what do you think are the chances of 20 sites on the same IP to link to your site? So what are the chances of having a PBN network where all the 20 PBN sites are on the same IP linking out to your site? The answer is 0. It's practically impossible, and that's why we need to diversify our IPs. But now a little bit more on IP addresses. And what are C-Class IPs? So basically an IP normally has 16 numbers, and in this case on the left you can see there are 4 blocks, so block A, B, C, and D, and that's how an IP address works. And then you have IPs of specialized companies for SEO hosting. There's a couple of them that say they're specialized in SEO hosting, and these companies that say they're specialized for hosting SEO sites are a big red flag. And this is not a good idea. You should not go and host your PBN sites with these quote-unquote specialized companies for SEO hosting. Not only because Google knows what these companies are, but also because the IP they're using are sequential IPs. So they create an easy pattern that Google can easily understand. As you can see, only the last 4 digits, actually only the last digit changes, and this is a big red flag. And then you have unique C-Class IPs, and these ones are different. And it's this variety that we want to have. This way it's more difficult to find a pattern. As you can see, it's really hard to find a pattern over here compared to the IPs of specialized companies for SEO hosting. And this is a perfect example of a pattern you do not want to create. These are 4 sites hosted on the same IP, and this will get you penalized. Now, a good hosting. As you can see, it's extremely complex, and we are not creating a pattern like here. Previously, this creates a huge pattern, not only because they're all the same IP, but even if they were sequential, it would create a pattern like which I showed you here. This is what you want to do. It's extremely complex, and you can barely detect any pattern here, which makes it even harder for Google to detect our PBN or your PBN. But what do you do when things go wrong? What would you do if your PBN were to be penalized? Basically, we want to make our PBN as organic and natural as possible. So if or when Google looks at it, it realizes that they are actually real sites that provide value to the community. So, that being said, if your PBN were to be discovered, it could be discovered in 3 ways. The first one is Google finds a pattern, which is the most common. That's why you should not use the specialized hosting, SEO hosting companies. You should use different IP addresses. And how do you use different C-Class IP addresses? You just put your sites on different hosting companies. So do Namecheap, do Bluehost, GoDaddy. Just spread out across different hosting companies. Not specialized SEO companies, but the regular website hosting companies. The other one is a competitor reporting your PBN, which is honestly quite rare, but it can happen. And finally, this is the least common of them all, which is a Google employee manually inspecting your PBN, which is extremely rare. But what happens next? What happens if in fact you get penalized? The answer is nothing. In most cases and in many cases, nothing will happen. But of course, sometimes in some very, very odd cases, Google will in fact devalue and make your PBN network useless. Google can also penalize your money sites, and Google can also penalize your money sites and the PBN sites as well, so making them both useless. And how can you prevent this? You can prevent this by building the PBN the right way. And in the next video, I'll show you how you can build your PBN network so you don't have to worry about this. Before that, some quick notes that you must be reminded is that you need to choose top hosting companies. We want to host our websites with companies that people know about. And it's important to understand why we choose a big hosting company, why we choose GoDaddy or HostGator or Namecheap. It's because when they give us an IP, it's one of thousands. So if you're using a smaller hosting company, the IP addresses they have access to would be much less. So that's the main reason why you choose a big hosting company. Of course, you also choose big hosting companies because of the support they give you. You also have live chat, emails, and the uptime, of course, the uptime of their servers. Now, cheap hosting makes sites slower and less secure. That's again another reason why you should use a big hosting company. Again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but you need to use different IPs for different sites on the PBN. So use different hosting companies. You need to include links to authoritative websites, just like Wikipedia, just like we talked about before. You need to diversify the themes and plugins you use in these sites, so not having a PBN where the sites are all the same. This just looks suspicious. So don't have a PBN where all your sites have the same theme and have the same wording and have no logo and have nothing. But I'll be explaining this in the next video on how, in fact, to build your PBN network. Then there are plugins to block Google from accessing your PBN sites. And in theory, this is good because Google can penalize what it can see. But the truth is that Google sees that we have something to hide. And so it has a reason to even be more suspicious. So don't use plugins that block Google crawlers. Then you need to create contact pages, terms and conditions, privacy policies, or even social media networks to make your sites look real. Basically, we want to make our PBN look as organic as possible, so that if Google looks at it, realizes it's a real site and not just a fake PBN. Then you need to publish articles with original content. Don't copy articles from other sites and publish them on your PBN. You need original content. You need to make your PBN valuable for readers because, again, you're creating real sites, not fake sites. And finally, this one is a bit obvious, but don't interlink PBN sites because if Google finds one, it will find them all and it will devalue them all and you'll lose all your network and all your hard work will go out the window. That being said, this concludes this video and I'll see you in the next one.